Don't grade everything. Come on, people.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 89th episode of the Hallway Conversations podcast. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, we're always looking for topics of conversation and feedback, so please email us or send us a recording of your questions to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We are looking for relevant and timely ideas, so please let us know if you have a show topic ruminating around in your head. We'd love to hear from you. Abby and Dave, we're nearing the end of the semester, and lately I've been looking at my grading pile. It's not getting less.
No? Oh,
It's
that's
not.
so weird.
I also have a daughter who's in her first year as an English teacher, and also talk to her sometimes about grading and feeling the weight of that. And I know we all feel that as a former English teacher. I feel
Absolutely.
that just thinking about her work. And one of the things I've been wondering about is the importance of giving good feedback and honoring student work with good assessment. And also wondering if there's a way to do that and be more efficient in our grading. So
Yes.
can we honor student work with effective assessment that is more efficient than the way we do it now? And maybe the answer to that is no, but I believe that there's a way. Like
I think there's strategies.
There's strategies.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and so I guess I'm just thinking about what encouragement might we have for the teachers listening in terms of saying, what advice might we give in being more efficient that doesn't lead us to feeling guilty
Right.
that we're not doing enough?
Right.
Because I think that's a real thing. So,
That's a great question.
Abby, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you
Yeah.
think deeply about assessment, so does Dave, but just, initial thoughts. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I'm going to point to a couple of resources because it turns out we're not the only people that think about this question.
Hey, after all.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'll have Dave put in the show notes a couple of resources. One is from, it's an infographic from Todd Finley, who's an associate professor of English education at East Carolina University. And he does these little infographics, and one of them is on efficient grading.
Hey, I like it.
I know. The other one is from the Call to Pedagogy blog, which she's a former teacher, now turned blogger, who I point my students to her stuff all the time.
So good.
It's so good. She's got just a really professional website dedicated to a lot of resources, and she has some tips for efficient grading there as well. So if you want to dig into this topic more deeply, and also just know that we drew from those sources as we were thinking about this. So one of the things I think about writing a lot, and one thing that I always tell my method students who are going to be one of those first-year English teachers very soon and will be buried in piles is, if you think of yourself as a student and you get a paper back, if it's covered in random marks, what is your reaction to that, right?
Well, as someone who received a lot of
Yeah.
mark back with a lot of marked up, a lot of it was like, this is overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm actually done before I look at
Correct,
it.
right? So we talk a lot in that class about how that can lead to wasted time on the teacher's part because the students can't receive it effectively, and therefore it makes no difference in their work. And so we talk a lot about focusing feedback on one or two skills at a time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like when you're doing something like writing, right? So if you are focusing a unit on, let's say, effective transitions, read for those.
Yeah.
Right? Have students read for those. I always tell my students, read process drafts so that you're not...
You don't get blindsided by something.
You don't have like 100 papers that you're seeing for the first time on a weekend, right? So when students get to this point, you're going to do a quick read-through of their intro paragraph. You're going to do a quick read-through of their outline before they even get to their intro paragraph to make sure they're on the right, and give feedback continually so that you don't get a paper that you're then seeing a finished draft of where students can't go back and make any changes along the way. So a lot of formative feedback, and also read for one or two specific things. And again, that's specific to English, but
Sure.
that's kind of where I start with my students.
I think that's applicable across content areas, though, because I think about all the lab reports I used to read
Right.
when I was a
Right.
middle school science teacher. And similarly, like there's common things the students do well, and there's common problem areas, right? And so that's maybe one of my strategies is to say, if I know that there's going to be some common areas, do I need to give that feedback individually to every student?
Right.
Like, are there times that we can give group feedback to the whole class? Because
Right.
honestly, that's way more efficient.
Put a couple of examples up on the board.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Have them look at their own stuff.
Yep, and then they can self-evaluate and
Correct.
compare to an exemplar and say, "Oh, yeah, I totally missed this
Do
section."
you guys use exemplars? Can I ask that? Because I know I've talked to teachers who have different reactions to that. Because some worry that by putting that up, it stymies creativity. Because
Sure.
now it's like it needs to look like that. And,
Yeah, yeah.
I personally really think they have tons of potential, but I'm just wondering.
That's a really
Yeah.
important question, though, I think, Matt. And I see that. I see both sides of that
Yeah.
issue, right? Like, yes, in some sense, if you show them the perfect example, then that's what they're going to slavishly follow and just do exactly that thing. But I think this is where if you can have a couple of different examples that get at the same basic learning target, and to say, here's an example of how someone did it, and here's another example of how someone did it, and here's another example of how someone did it. And as long as you've got, they meet the criteria of whatever the assignment, the writing, the project, whatever it is, that can help. Sometimes just having one exemplar is enough, though.
Yeah.
That also depends. So I'll give you, for instance, in Intro to Ed, we write just like a paragraph of reflection each week, basically every week of the semester. Well, the first time they're writing one of those, I want to put a good one in front of them so they have an idea. Like, this is what it looks like. I say a meaty paragraph. If it's 2 or 3 sentences, that's probably not enough. It doesn't need to be a page, right? And to give them an example. And so it's one that I wrote for them to just kind of help them get the picture of it. Well, then I give them a lot of feedback on that first one that they do, because I know that if I invest a lot of time on that first
Right.
one, I don't have to
Right.
invest as much time on
So
every
being
subsequent one.
strategic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's maybe another strategy, right? Pick and choose when we're going to give detailed feedback.
One of the other things that I've noticed, like I've tried more to not grade everything,
Yeah.
but I also hear feedback at times from students that says like no grade to them indicates not as important or
Yeah.
no value. And I know that's sort of been conditioned.
Sure.
So I've just been wrestling with that idea of hey, I'm not going to grade it. And how do you respond when students that say, well, why should I do it? Because it's so, like I said, it's part of their learning story.
Yeah.
That things of value get graded, things of value don't. So I'm even once, I believe that's one way to be more efficient is not to grade everything. But I also wrestle with how might you respond to a student who says, or who has that mindset? And anything come to mind?
Yeah. Well, immediately something we talked about with Val last week when Val Doneveld was with us here, and one of the things she was saying was kind of getting at that idea, right? Like when do students actually need the feedback on things, right? Like they don't need everything to be graded, and maybe we need to flip that script a little bit. That sometimes it is just practice because that's where it's going to be developed. And do they need a grade on that? Could we just grade for completion? Hey, you did the thing, you did the
Right.
practice.
Could there be like a pass-fail sort of
Right,
option?
right. Or
which
complete
I've
incomplete,
done
right?
in
Yeah.
classes. I also, I have students do practice teaching lessons to each other. They'll do peer teaching lessons, and I don't grade them.
Yeah.
And students don't grade them. But I consistently get feedback that that's one of the most powerful learning experiences in our class. But they give each other a lot of written feedback.
Yeah.
So the feedback is the valuable piece to them, but there is absolutely, like, as long as they show, like, they have to, it's a real audience. They can't come to class and
Sure.
not be prepared.
Right.
Because that's, like, nobody's ever not come prepared to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
exercise, even though it's not graded.
Well, but there's a
Because
high-stakes component to
There's
it,
a high
right?
stakes, like, real life component to that. So I also think, and I give feedback in the moment, and then, but students find it to be a really valuable experience, even though it's not reflected in my grade book at all.
As you say that, though, Abby, I'm thinking about, so what would be the analog for in a K-12 setting, right? In higher ed, when we're working with future teachers, and maybe it's one thing, right? But I'm thinking, like, even, okay, when I was a middle school science teacher, I did not grade every single thing that students did. And that's okay, right? Like, there's a lot of the active work that we're doing in class. They're working in the science lab. I don't need to give them a grade for what they did in class today, right? I can just like be present and observing what's happening in the classroom and take the temperature of the room, like how are they doing and understanding this, right? And to do some kind of a formative assessment strategy, an exit ticket or something like that, that gives me some specific information. I don't need to grade that. Right. And so to let ourselves off the hook, I guess, there are times where, this is something that I definitely need to grade. Students definitely need feedback because this is a substantial piece of work where it's summative and it's going to, give real indication. How did you pull all the pieces together? Like, they definitely need feedback on those. But let's let ourselves off the hook for some of those small stuff then.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that even in grading or assessing papers, like, do I make a comment on every comma splice? Every right? And finding that balance, right? Of maybe just circling it or putting a star by it, just a check mark or like, but not feeling like I have to also write, so like, here's what it is, like commas and here's why, but just, hey, make them aware, and then actually sort of letting them decide what they want to do with it, to be honest. And I think there's something good about that, saying, hey, you just need to know something is amiss here, but I'm going to let you decide how much ownership to take of that. The other thing, as you were talking about students sort of giving feedback and assessing each other, have you ever had students assess themselves? I'm just wondering, or like even in terms of being more efficient, like I'm thinking of, so here's the paper and I'm going to give you feedback on it, but also here's the rubric. Read your paper through this rubric. Give yourself feedback on the rubric. Now go make the changes almost, right? And so I also just think, again, it's about, hey, we can be more efficient, but it's also, hey, like make them more aware of even of what they're handing in, what they're submitting, and
I do that a lot with rough drafts when I taught K-12.
Yeah,
come with a rough draft. Here's your rough draft due date, and now we're gonna look at. And I had access to them often electronically, so I would again pull out common things that I was seeing, have them go in their papers, fix them before. And that's part of process writing too, right? And I think we can do that with a lot of projects or other types of assessment.
Because I think sometimes it's like, hey, I put this paper together, I do a once through, I've handed it in, I'm done. And there's a part, and I get a lot of good papers, but it's also at times where I want to say, do you know what you handed in? Like, do you want, or just even to be aware, right? Like, are you aware? Like, have you really read the rubric? And where does the part of the paper that meets this part of the rubric? And where's the part of the paper that meets this? Because sometimes I think, in a sense, they think they've done that, and so then just wondering, okay, you show me the evidence. Where
I have students annotate their own work sometimes.
Interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I do it with lesson plans, and I have them do an annotated lesson plan. It's with my literacy in the content area. So it's often high school, or they're going to be high school teachers who are trying to implement literacy activities in science and math and art and history. And they have to label them for me and talk about which strategies they used from the text that we're studying and how they're accommodating for kids who struggle and for kids who are more advanced. And they have to point it out on their paper, and then they have to reflect on, because they do a peer feedback too, and then they have to tell me what they changed after that peer feedback. And it's that mindfulness about the assignment that I think produces a better
mindfulness. Yeah, it's good work. That's a really good word.
a better final product.
Do you guys ever have, I'm thinking about ways of leveraging technology to help kind of techie here, right? Do you ever do auto-graded quizzes or things like that? Yeah. And this is something for, if it's straight up just I want you to know this stuff. I want you to be able to recall this stuff. Yeah. I think that's a great strategy for being able to automate some of the feedback.
Google Classroom, Canvas.
Yep, that you can build a quiz and students take the quiz online and they get immediate feedback on here's the ones you got right, here's the ones you got wrong. You can make those low stakes, let them do redos and retakes on them, right? Because even that becomes practice then. The ones you got wrong, now you have an opportunity to try them again.
You can even build, most of them, you can build question banks. So if they retake it, they can get a different set of questions.
But I think that can be a really helpful way. Like I say, there are things I want students to just know things too.
Right.
Like part of being educated is just knowing things off the top of your head, and so to be able to check recall that way, that's a really efficient way to grade that.
If I said to each of you, or maybe fill in the blank, or like a good rubric, what makes for a good rubric? A good rubric has what? And I know that's a whole different podcast, but just just as we talk about being more efficient, or like, hey, can rubrics help be more efficient? And then what makes a good rubric? Just what are some initial, because not everyone uses them, and so I'm just curious what comes to mind for each of you.
Well, I'll just say I really like rubrics a lot.
Okay.
If I'm assigning a paper or a project or presentation, some kind of an authentic product like that, I like students to have a rubric because that gives them clarity on. Well, it gives me clarity when I'm grading it, but it gives them clarity on here's the things I'm going to be looking for. So I guess that's one thing I would say about a good rubric is not. It's going to give them clarity about the things that matter for this particular project. So if I don't care about spelling, if that's not the point of this project, I'm not going to include that as a criterion in my rubric. Content knowledge always is a priority, right? Like whatever the thing is, I want to see clear evidence that you clearly know the content. And I might have multiple criteria related to the content depending on what the project is. So I think that's maybe one good principle. The other thing is I like rubrics too. The difference between a rubric and a criteria chart, I like criteria charts a lot. If it's something that can just be more straightforward, then it's like a yes, no. Like, did you do this or not, right?
And that, like with standards based, that can be helpful, right? Because here's the standard, did you meet it?
Right.
Yes, no.
And it really is just a criterion checking, like, did you do this? Did you do this? Yes, no. Yes or not yet, I think that's sometimes where people get hung up on creating a rubric. It's like, well, do I have to have 5 categories of different descriptors? No, you do not have to have 5 categories of descriptors because sometimes a yes, no or yes, not yet is enough for that.
All right, here's my next question. When it comes to assessment, teachers should be free to what? When it comes to assessment, teachers should be free to
get creative.
Okay, get creative. All right.
I say that cautiously, but seriously too. You guys know my shtick about playfulness, and I think so often we take ourselves way too seriously, and I think we should take our work seriously. But to give students creative options to demonstrate what they've learned, there's a tension with that because I think that means sometimes we have to then have a really good rubric that can be used flexibly across a lot of different kinds of projects or something like that. But that could even be something like if I'm going to give students a quiz at the end of a unit, we can work, they don't have to be boring. Right? Like there's ways that we can work in some creativity, right? So have students help generate the quiz. I always liked putting students' names if I was giving like story problems on a math test or something like that, right? Like working in students' names and activities that they love. And those are small things, but they matter. And the kids to see themselves even in a quiz that they're going to take.
Well, I like it. Abby, anything come to mind if I say when it comes to assessment, teachers should be free to...
be authentic. Like I was talking about that teaching, but I like creative too. So I feel like I was just reading a research article about a teacher educator who had her teacher education students create like these little animations about teaching scenarios, and she was saying how, and she had research to back it up, how much more deeply students thought about what the students experienced in that teaching scenario when they had to put themselves in the place of like animating that side of it, and how much more they noticed about a teaching scenario than if they just wrote about it. And so I think like the closer you can get to authentic like scenarios and making students think maybe outside the box of what they've done. Because I've given creative assignments that students have kind of pushed back on, like, we're not used to this, but it does make them think about it and think around it in ways that are good for them and that are deeper. So I think being authentic, being creative, not just doing what you've always been done or what you think assessment needs to look like.
Sure.
Yeah, interesting. To release yourself from that.
Right. And
to not feel bad about that.
Right. There's good reasons for it, and it's actually really effective.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Friends, we know your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. Whether it's this day, this week, or this month, we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of And we'd like to send you from here with a blessing. So to our listeners, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you have a good week.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
It's 80 degrees in Northwest Iowa, and it'll probably snow next week.
Chances are very
Chances
good.
are very
Is that
good.
a real thing, or are you making that up?
I'm totally making it up,
Okay.
and it's probably a real thing.